The Holocene is what geologists have called the last 11,000 years or so since the end of the last ice age. Compared to other epochs, the Holocene epoch is extremely young. They say that it's in its diaper stages. The epochs that are previous to this, which is the Pleistocene, lasted for 2 million years, so that puts things into perspective how young it is. It's believed that people have impacted the planet so drastically that we must end the Holocene period and rename the last couple hundred years and forward the Anthropocene. The term Anthropocene is not yet formally defined, a formally defined geological unit within the timescale. We now exist in an era where humans have fundamentally changed the geology of the Earth and are present in almost all ecosystems. It is thought that these changes started primarily in the 18th century around the time of the Industrial Revolution and when the steam engine was made. It was then that scientists discovered air trapped in polar ice that showed the beginning of growing global concentrations of carbon dioxide and methane gas. The word Anthropocene was coined by Paul Crutzen. He was one of three chemists who shared the 1995 Nobel Prize for discovering the effects of ozone-depleting compounds. In the year 2000, Crutzen and Eugene Stromer, who was a professor at the University of Michigan, began publishing articles in journals about man-made changes to the Earth. They noted that many forms of human activity now dwarf their natural counterparts, and that just means that there's more nitrogen today fixed synthetically than is fixed by all the world's plants in the ocean and on land. So there's a group called the Anthropocene Working Group of the International Commission of Stratigraphy, and they have been looking into whether a new epoch should be officially designated for human behaviors. Usually in the past, boundaries between geological time periods are established based off of changes to the fossil record. This working group has been working many years to this proposal and is set to be decided sometime in 2016. So my arguments for this debate are, the first one is human impact to the planet isn't just going to last for a couple thousand more years. The changes and disturbances that we've caused to the planet are thought to have lasting effects of tens of millions of years. We know that these are human causes and not just for natural reasons. And my second argument is that the true marker of this epoch isn't what we've done, but what we will do. And by this, I mean that yes, humans have been impacting the Earth since we've been here, but we've yet to experience the Anthropocene because its impacts are going to happen and going to be even greater in 50 to 100 years. Geologists are still debating whether we've even begun the Anthropocene period yet because of what could potentially happen in the late 21st century.
So basically, to repeat, there has been a debate over the past several years over whether to introduce a new geologic time period called the Anthropocene period, which would mark the significance of humans' impact on the geologic time scale. But I think that this addition is unnecessary because it does not follow the current rules for establishing a geologic time period. Humans have no doubt had a large impact on the Earth, but this impact alone is not criteria for setting up a geologic time period. In order to designate a new geologic time period, there needs to be a layer of sediment that clearly shows signs of rapid natural changes that is uniform across the globe. Currently, there has been no such definitive layer found that is uniform across the globe that backs up the notion to create an Anthropocene period. Also, these rules were put in place by the International Commission on Stratigraphy, which is debating whether or not to create the Anthropocene period, but currently they have not changed the rules to do so. And on top of that, all of the other geologic time periods throughout history have been separated by naturally occurring events. Human activity, not nature, is the driving force of the current global changes. And again, while they have caused natural changes, these changes are not yet on par or have not yet been seen to be on par with the natural changes of the past. mostly because these changes have not yet produced a layer of sediment that can show the rapidly changing environment that the Anthropocene supposedly has created. So, right now, as the facts stand, we can't go against the clear cut rules that are in place just to make a point about environmental change. We need these rules to make sure that geologic time periods are set uniformly and accurately um, with the criteria that is currently in place.
I think that human impact is enough to change the rules because in a couple million years from now, maybe even not that long, there will be enough evidence to show that humans have changed the Earth. So, the first thing I want to say is that when fossil fuels are burned to generate electricity and to drive our cars, carbon dioxide is released into the atmosphere where it traps heat. So, carbon molecules that come from fossil fuels and deforestation are lighter in weight than carbon molecules that come from natural sources. So there are more lightweight carbon molecules indicating that these did not come from naturally occurring sources. The second reason stems from the first. There's carbon that's trapped in the atmosphere that causes the surface to heat because it has nowhere to go. This is also directly related to human activity because we're the ones who are putting the carbon into the air. So basically, over time, lighter molecules or lighter carbon molecules have become more abundant in the atmosphere. Lastly, the boundary between the lower atmosphere and the upper atmosphere have moved upward in recent decades. This is because heat trapping gases are accumulating and heating up the troposphere, in turn blocking heat from reaching the stratosphere, which is causing cooling there. This cooling and heating process would not both occur if the sun were the only climate driver. If the sun was the only thing driving climate change, both the stratosphere and the troposphere would be experiencing warming, not one experiencing cooling and one experiencing warming. Some of the effects from this are mass extinction that's caused from destruction and introduction of invasive species. Another thing is ocean acidification, which is changing the chemical makeup of the oceans, and urbanization, which is increasing the rates of sedimentation and erosion. Human activity is really altering the planet on a scale that's comparable to some of the major events in the past that have defined geological time periods. Um, I think that that's enough evidence to show that the rules should be bent a little bit here and that they should change the geologic timescale. I understand that there are rules and that everything needs to be uniform. But one suggestion to this is to just wait a couple more years or a couple, like 50 to 100 more years before we decide what the definitive marker is because regardless of when it is decided, it's important that it's recognized and published because, like I said before, in millions of years, there is going to be enough evidence in the fossil records to show that humans have significantly impacted the planet enough to have our own time period.
So, I'd like to address the issue of it being evident in millions of years while it's not currently evident. Um, Basically, this just goes back to the rules. We can't assume that that the changes caused by humans are on par with the natural changes that have occurred in the past, because the evidence for those changes simply isn't there right now. The layers that have been proposed already to set apart these geologic time periods and to mark the significance of human impacts have been tentative. They have been also not uniform across the globe, such as the air bubbles and the polar ice caps. Those are located in a specific area, which the criteria specifically says it needs to be global, not so local, not so confined. And additionally, human activity, while it is a very large, it has very large impacts on the environment, on nature, that still doesn't really fit with the criteria. We can't just be setting up geologic time periods based on the impact of certain events within the period. Those events must have a clearly defined um, sedimentary layer coming from those events. And with the fossilization process being as slow as it is, taking millions of years, we wouldn't be able to have the evidence of fossilization or the sedimentary layer until millions of years in the future. So we can't rightly justify setting those boundaries now when we do not have that information. We're also not able to see whether the changes influenced by humans are on par with the natural events of the past because of the lack of sedimentary and fossil data. Um, Also, the notion of placing a tentative date leaves a lot of room for inaccuracies. There could be, we could set a date now, but then we might be skewing the actual data, skewing the actuality of the situation, and not setting a proper boundary for the geologic time period. Um, we can't be doing all of this just to make a statement. There are better ways to make statements on the environmental impacts of humans, which we've already been making. People have come out against climate change. People have addressed those issues, especially scientists. There are climate scientists who have mentioned all of that, and changing the geologic time frame, changing the rules of setting up a geologic time period, in my opinion, is not the way to go about making this statement again. I think there are better places for that, and I think that in this case we need to stick to the rules that are in place so that we can make sure that there is accuracy and make sure that there is uniformity amongst the different geologic time period settings.
So while I understand what Ryan is saying, there are rules, I get that. But at the same time, I think that it is necessary to change the geological time period to the Anthropocene because um, humans have had a huge impact on the earth. And I think that there are still a lot of people out there who don't believe in climate change and who don't believe that we're doing anything wrong. And I think that by changing it and saying that we are in a geological time period that's been caused by humans, I think people would really, it would like bring things to light and people would really understand that no, we are really significantly impacting the planet. So, no matter which side you believe, which side you support, I think it's important that we all know that we have changed the planet immeasurably and that the effects that we've had are long lasting, like millions of years long lasting. And I believe that the only way to get everyone, not everyone, but mostly everyone to understand that is to change it because eventually there will be enough evidence to show that this is due to human behavior.
I'd like to conclude basically just by saying that yes, humans are causing great environmental change. I'm not arguing that. I'm not arguing against climate change or any of those environmental effects and impacts that we have had on the globe. What I would like to say, though, is that we can't go around changing the geologic time period criteria just because humans have had this impact. These rules are set in place to make sure that everything is set down accurately, to make sure that scientists can conduct research accurately so that they can attribute events to specific time periods accurately. And while the idea of the Anthropocene may seem like it would be a good way to help with this categorization, with as much speculation that there still is, that's not really an accurate statement. There can't, with all the speculation there is, we wouldn't have enough information regarding the Anthropocene geologic time period to accurately determine, okay, when did it start, when is it still continuing, and how much has it affected currently. We know that humans have had a large impact on the globe and on our environment, but we don't know the scale of that impact yet. We don't know whether it's comparable to the natural disasters of the past because we just don't have the fossil record evidence. We don't have the sedimentary records. we don't have enough there to justify it being its own geologic time period. Um, we basically don't have the requirements to set it up. It would be like if you shot a basket from 3 points, but you used one arm instead of two. They wouldn't count it as a 5 point basket. It's still a 3 point basket. So just because the situation is different and it seems to indicate that there are big changes, we have to still treat it like it's the same. We have to treat it with the same rules, and we can't just change it because of the environmental impact that we see currently. We have to stick to the sedimentary and the fossil data that is required.